Good morning, wherever you are joining us from. Thanks for being here for today's webinar. I am Matt Staney, VP of Community for the Americas at Hire, where I focus on building a connected network of senior talent acquisition and people leaders, creating spaces for meaningful conversations, fresh ideas, and shared learning here at Hire Community. And so, for anybody that's new to us, Hire is a global in-house TA community of over 12,500 members. Our mission is simple. We want to elevate the TA profession by connecting leaders with each other and the insights that keep you at the forefront of the industry. We do this through our regular leadership dinners throughout the US and New York, Boston, Chicago, LA, and SF. If you're in the Boston area or New York, I'll be there next week and I got a couple seats at dinner. So hit me up on LinkedIn if you'd like to join us. These are amazing, amazing events. And then, we also do it through our webinars like this one. We have amazing thought leader content on our Hire Knowledge blog, our Hiring on All Cylinders podcast. Love having members on for as guests in those platforms to share your work. We do white papers and resources and content to help you keep ahead of the curve in an industry that right now is just constantly evolving, is it not? Right. And so if you're not a member yet, joining is completely free. You just head over to hirehq.com to sign up or feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I'm happy to get on a call with you, help you get hooked into the community. You can also scan this QR code that you're probably seeing on your screen, and you can sign up right now on your phone in like less than 5 minutes. When it comes to community, it's a give and take, but here we're not going to get sold to, not going to be, there's no membership fee. It's just really about the learning, guys. So join up. You will not regret it, right? And so before we get started, I just want to say a big thankful to Talentful, our sponsor for today's webinar, for making these conversations possible. Such an amazing practitioner first, community focused company. Talentful is an embedded RPO, right? So tailor made for technology companies working with the likes of Google, Atlassian, Microsoft, name it. They hire in over 80 different countries and cover tech, go-to-market, and G&A hiring. The model is designed to sort of scale up or down with you and your requirements, get us out of this loop of hiring big in-house teams, having to do layoffs, rehiring again, right? And so helping you add that flexibility to your ongoing hiring strategy. And so today I'm really pleased to welcome everyone here to the webinar. We're going to be talking about purpose meets people, how sustainability drives talent success. And so we're going to be exploring how aligning sustainability with your talent strategy not only strengthens your employer brand, but also drives attraction, engagement, retention, and long-term business success. There's a real ROI to being sustainable, y'all, and we're going to talk about it. So from scaling responsibly, I should say, in new markets to using technology thoughtfully in hiring to building cultures that connect people to purpose. This is where sustainable thinking leads to real measurable results. And so it's a timely conversation, I think, for talent and people leaders who want to build strategies that are future focused, adaptable, built to last, right? And that will attract that new age of worker who really cares about this stuff, as we're going to find out, right? And so we want this to be an interactive session. So please do share your thoughts, your questions along the way. I'll be monitoring our Q&A and bringing your questions live into the conversation. So we'll do our best to answer them throughout the session. And then we'll also have some time at the end for anything that we don't get to. So now, after all that long-winded intro, I'm going to hand it over to our speakers, Carla and Bridgette, to introduce themselves before we dive into this discussion. Carla, we'll go with you first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carla McIntosh. I am a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and have been in the talent acquisition field for over 26 years. My experience has spanned all different types of recruiting, from starting with Robert Half International, initially doing third-party staffing, to owning my own recruiting firm for over a decade, to holding a number of roles across talent acquisition at Google, and then I was the VP of talent acquisition at Reddit. And most recently, I've been assisting a company called Syelo Ventures as a senior strategic advisor. And I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, it's so good to have you here. Bridgette.
Hello, my name is Bridgette Bell McAdoo, and I am now the and current Chief Sustainability Officer at Genesys, and have over 20 plus years in different areas, everything from engineering to operations, supply chain, and sustainability for the past 10 years. So I've been in this space way before it became a buzzword. So looking forward to having that conversation about how it has evolved, what it really encompasses, and how we can intersect with our HR teams.
Wonderful. It is so great. Thank you both for being here. I've had the pleasure of meeting you both separately for this and understanding your career and your background. Just honored to have you here to share your knowledge. You know, before we get into details, let's start with some fundamentals, right? I feel like sustainability gets thrown around in all kinds of contexts.
Yeah.
We need to define this first. Like, let's set some guardrails on exactly what we're going to be diving into. Sort of like, let's look at the map before we go on this journey, right?
Mhm.
Because it means a lot of different things to different organizations. Bridgette, could you help us out with this? Could you explain like how you define sustainability within an organization? And I think you've got a slide with some visual for us here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to because it's kind of one of those things when people say it's not rocket science. As somebody who used to work for NASA, I'm like, it's overused context. But the people use the word sustainable to describe a multitude of things. So when I think of sustainability, I'm truly thinking about this integrated approach. And the old school way of thinking about it was people, profit, and planet. And we've evolved, right? So you've heard it referred to as sustainability, impact, ESG. They are all trying to give the same purpose of how do we look at the intersection between the environment, the intersection between the society and our communities, and then the intersection between how do we make sure that there's proper governance in place. So anything on the environment can be everything from carbon emissions reductions that any company might be utilizing, their assets, if they have like green buildings or LEED certified buildings, looking at how you travel, commute, flexible work environments are all part of what are you doing to make sure you can scale responsibly and not have an intense impact on the environment and the planet. When we look at the societal landscape, it's everything from our DEI or belonging practices that companies might have, community, philanthropy, sustainable procurement practices or supply chain or supplier inclusion. It looks at everything that happens to your ecosystem when it comes to your key stakeholders. What are you doing for your employees? What are you doing for your communities? How do you pour back? Because sustainability is truly about our license to operate. You're licensed to scale from an environmental perspective. You're licensed to operate from a societal perspective. And then on the G side, the governance is your license to just be able to exist. What are you doing? What are your responsible practices? Your policies that you might have to address anything from modern slavery to ethical standards, especially in this advent company like mine with AI. What are you doing around your ethical AI and your practices? How are you ensuring that people are compliant and paying attention to anything that might be a regulatory requirement and that you need to be have compliance for? So you take all of those three together, and that intersection is where you get the true benefit to the company, where you could optimize your operations, reduce your risk, and make sure that you're being a corporate, responsible corporate steward.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. That breaks it down so well. But there's a lot under this umbrella, so we're going to
Yeah.
be covering a lot of territory today. Carla, help us out here. Like, what's driving leaders to connect sustainability and talent strategy, like right now in this moment?
I think right now in the war for mission-driven talent, to me, it's the 911, and I think it's a clear way for a company to distinguish itself from many of its competitors. The realities are simply offering compelling pay, potentially a flexible work schedule, or good job descriptions and duties. That is not enough because a lot of people right now are working in teams that are understaffed, so they're very thin. They're being asked to do more with less, and so for them to be able to show up every day to a company that not only has great declared publicly facing goals and interests, but also is walking the talk. That is something that resonates a bit more with different generations, in particular with people that are Gen Zers. They simply want to work with a company that they're very proud of, and a company who is very unapologetic for the way that they approach their work. So I would say gone are the days where it's okay to not have a very intentional emphasis on how you operate and the values that you hold both internally and externally.
Yeah, I think regardless of whether we're in an employer-driven market or a candidate-driven market, right? We've definitely, switched the pendulum there the last few years. But like, yeah, it sounds like we're all experiencing, the effects of a changing climate right now. Hurricanes are getting bigger, right? And so, Bridgette, question for you. Sustainability is often grouped under corporate social responsibility, right? When really it's much broader. How can TA and HR leaders help bring that more integrated definition to life across the business?
Yeah, you will see the work that situated in different places. It really depends on the company, but I can tell how it's situated of what it really means to the organization, right? So if it's sitting under CSR, corporate social responsibility, sometimes that means that they're just looking at this as a community perspective. If I see it sitting under comms, they're thinking of it, or marketing, they're thinking of it from a marketing perspective and branding. If it's sitting under engineering, they're looking at it from an operation, and none of those things are wrong. But where I think you get the best results is when it sits across the organization. And that's where the relationship with talent really comes into play. You want to integrate it into just your business practices. You want it to be an extension of your values. And that is where TA and HR becomes a huge value proposition to the work, because it's part of your onboarding, it's part of your development. It's part of how you look at how employees are going to be have a sense of belonging into the organization. And once you use everything you're doing around sustainability to become an organic extension of how you work, that's where that TA comes in, because you start to integrate it into your KPIs or your OKRs. And that's when you start to see, okay, employees are actually not just, they're living out what we're expecting them to do. And so when you're putting your goals and your commitments for sustainability out to the public, the employees are already an invested part of that. And that helps when you have a good relationship with TA, because those OKRs, for us, every single employee has to look at, how they are going to help us with our goals around our emissions, or around making sure that we are pouring back into our communities. That's when it really lives. And when TA can help you to do that, having those conversations around OKRs and development, making sure that you're looking at your surveys around belonging scores, and working together to collaborate on how to make a better value proposition for the employee. That's when it really thrives.
Got it. So where is it sort of owned? Like obviously HR being so naturally cross-functional, recruiting too, right? Every part of the business needs that part of service. Like, who owns this? Or is it, is this a role within the C-suite? Is this, another one of those new job descriptions being added to the chief people officer? Like, how does that show up tangibly?
If you ask me, I say everyone owns it, right? I love having my role. I'm not trying to work myself. Well, technically I should be working myself out of a role, because you do want it to become everyone's job. So if you ask me, I would say it is absolutely everyone's responsibility. I always refer to this as join us on this journey, because no sustainability team can do this work alone, right? So it does involve everyone across the talent organization to be just as invested as I am, because every single employee has to get invested.
Got it. Yeah. And so in that C-suite, that CEO especially,
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
they need to set the vision of like what's important, what's the programs we're going to support, but then it takes everyone at the company like believing into that, and then that you push that from a hiring perspective. And you say, now we're going to go find people who are driven by that same purpose or mission
Mhm.
that align with
Because
it.
this work usually ends up happening over the decade that I've been in this space. It's really been more of a bottom-up approach, right? Those grassroots efforts that employees have green teams or whatever the case might be, and or the inclusion groups or ERGs, they kind of push it up. But where it really should thrive is it's a top-down approach, meaning your leadership, your CEO, and that whole C-suite are just as committed, and the bottom-up approach, so that it's a push and pull. So if you're in a situation where you can have both the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach, that's where you're going to have the good wins.
That's great. I think that's a really good segue into the next kind of area we're going to chat about, which is really around the business value of purpose. All right. And so let's explore how that translates into measurable outcomes, right? So how does the business case, look like in practice? Bridgette, I'll start with you. What are some concrete ways that sustainability drives measurable talent outcomes?
Yeah, there's attraction and retention, of course. There's the employee development part of it, as we talked about, responsible business practices that's helping you to reduce your risk, of course, the inclusive work environments that are created through sustainability, and then leadership development. All those things I think are tangible ways. And what I always try to tell people is a lot of times where in the past 10 years, people have always said, what's the ROI on sustainability? The assumption is that it's going to cost the organization more, when the reality is it's actually saving you holistically. We always talk about that total cost of use. Well, the total cost of not being a sustainable company is going to impact the organization more than being a sustainable company. When you're thinking about the amount of attrition that you would have in an organization or the risk that you introduce. So I always, implore people to not think about only just the quantitative part of any initiative you do, but the qualitative impact. And, as Carla mentioned earlier, that value proposition, employees want to feel like they belong to a company that is an extension of their own personal values. And so, I would never try to minimize the power or the qualitative impact of being a good corporate steward.
Love that. It makes me think of like the example, like the return to office, right? There's obviously some pros and cons to that from a sustainability standpoint. And I think that, was it data just came out like the past week or two where they essentially said that, that over the last 4 years of this return to work after the pandemic, that there's been zero tangible difference to productivity, right? But when we were studying during the pandemic of everyone at home, there was like incredible increase in productivity, right? And so if we're thinking about productivity being equaling profit, like that there's something that is both sustainable because less cars on the road, all that good stuff, but also the true business impact, right? And so like how do you make the case, let's say if your company is maybe doing some policies that are maybe not sustainable or don't have a sustainability program, like how do you make the case for sustainability as a business advantage when you're speaking to the senior leadership or maybe board when you're trying to get that going? Bridgette.
Uh, I would say that you can always build the business case of retention. If there's a way that you can qualify it, right? You look at the cost of the employee that you have to rehire. You can always make the business case there. It drives customer value. Especially if you're a global company, the amount of your constituents that are especially in Europe or APAC, they're going to want to have some significant questions around your sustainable business practices, and you're going to have to provide that to them. It helps you to differentiate yourself also. And then there's the compliance part. You do always want to make sure that you're as compliant as possible to anything that's coming out across the globe. And so, that in itself is a huge business case to make sure that you're building in those practices.
Love it. So de-risking as well in that. Fantastic. Carla, let's come back to you. So like what metrics or evidence help demonstrate sort of the ROI of purpose-driven talent strategies? I think
I
this is
think
usually the
overall,
biggest thing, right? Like,
yeah, it is. I think overall, I mean, the way that I think about it is everything that's done can help to shape a more compelling overall employer value proposition. And how do you know it's working? One of the ways you know it is that you have a tremendous reduction of voluntary exits from the company because people are, less inclined to leave the company because they just love what they're doing. I think a secondary piece would be looking at your employee engagement survey information. And a lot of companies where in the past I've helped develop questions. Some of the questions that you may ask or might be something like, even if presented with another opportunity for similar pay or, higher level, how inclined would you be to leave X company to go to Y? And the way that people answer that question is a big indicator because oftentimes a company may be paying less, but because people feel so connected to the work, that is a compelling reason to stay. I think a third indicator would be overall time to fill. A lot of times when you have a very attractive employer brand, you get a lot of referrals from your employees. You also have a lot of people that see your organization as a highly desirable company to join. And so that's a great indicator. I'd say another one would be, Bridgette mentioned data and governance. When you've done those proactive data and governance audits, how favorable are the findings? Do the findings show that your company is working in a way as you intended it to work? Meaning you've looked at bias in your process and other things, and you're getting the right outcomes because you've engineered your processes in a way that is taking you there. So those are just some of the big ones that you can think about. And Bridgette touched on another one, which I think is really important. I would say twofold. For candidates that have been in the process, thinking about their candidate engagement surveys, and then for people that are external partners or who support the organizations, thinking about their satisfaction surveys. And then I think the final one, which is to me most important, thinking about what your offer acceptance rates are, and then having the data to look at when they decline a role, truly digging in to see that it's not because they felt a misalignment to your company mission. In some cases, they're just insurmountable things that pose a risk as to why a person could not accept your role. Could be a very, very vast disparity in pay, or maybe leveling, things that on a personal note people need to take advantage of. But overall, those are some key indicators if you know that it's working.
I think that's great. It makes me think of I read a case study recently. It was like a chocolate company in one of these companies where, most people wouldn't think like I really aspire and really find purpose driven by working at this chocolate company, right? But like the fact that their mission is really tied towards ending child slavery and all these things, right? And how much the company gives to that, and that's really what it's about, right? The people that work there have super long tenures and they find so much fulfillment in that work, not by just the products being sold, but like the actual impact the company has in certain communities or things they care about. And so that's, I think what we're talking about there is this, there's this shift, right, in workforce expectations, right, where the purpose becomes sort of a talent magnet, right? And so if I think about like when I was doing my best work is because I was very aligned into my purpose and what I wanted to put out into the world, right? And so, purpose clearly drives performance, but it's also being shaped by what employees expect from their employers, right? And so employee expectations have evolved so much over the last few years, right? With many, especially the younger generations, wanting to work for companies that act responsibly and lead with purpose. I think we're all seeing a lot of bad behaviors by companies out there in the world, and I think that the folks are seeking companies where they can sleep at night, right? And so, Carla, like, how is that shaping how organizations are attracting and retaining talent today?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, the sound on my
Yeah.
end went out.
Oh yeah. So how is that shaping, right? These employee expectations evolving, right? How is that shaping how organizations are attracting and retaining talent today?
I think for one, it's putting them on alert, and it's forcing them to do their own homework to understand what resonates with people now. And I think in the past, people were simply glossing the surface. And smart companies, I would say, understand that it is a competitive advantage, particularly as we think about emerging areas like AI. Companies that can do things to distinguish themselves from the pack. I think that's a big one. But to boil it down, I think if companies don't embed sustainability into everything that they're doing and forge this intentional partnership between sustainability leaders and TA leaders, they're simply going to be a company that is filling roles. Those who master this will actually be able to create a movement. A movement is going to produce more innovative products, have a more inspired and highly performing culture overall, and it's going to be a talent magnet, even in tough economies. And most importantly, they will be able to hire the best and brightest people across their respective industry who will be highly incentivized and motivated to attract other like skill sets and people. So to me, that's it in a nutshell.
Love that. Bridgette, we've talked about evolving employee expectations, like how do you see engagement with employees and communities, right, influencing how organizations are defining, or practice sustainability today?
You see it across the organization, whether it's in your inclusion or ERGs, right? That those should be employee led and how they are working across the organization. If you have a green team or ambassadors that work on environmental initiatives, most of those come from the employees. They are community led. So you have your global initiatives or your global values, but a lot of the action is just very locally based. So you want to make sure that those employees feel empowered. And so there's a lot of work with the talent team to make sure that there are like almost like experience centers across the globe, right? Each region has their own way of reflecting their cultural relevance, a way of living out their values of the organization and the community in need. And when you do that, you'll see a huge shift in your employees because now they're connected not only to your company, but they're also connected to the community. They're seeing that they can have those values or those desires linked. And it starts to create a huge groundswell of, your higher belonging scores or your higher employee experience scores. Do they feel valued in the company? Do they feel like they're being heard? And it also it's like one of your benefits when you think about it, right? The ability for employees to feel empowered, to be able to pour back into their communities, is part of your benefits to me. When I think about my total benefits that I want to go into a company for, it's one of those that's, again, not quantitative, but it's extremely qualitative because it's part of your quality of life.
Yeah, well, that. And so, so how can businesses respond authentically to those expectations? Like, well, still maintaining a focus on the results and the performance.
I think it can show up in a multitude of ways, right? One of it is just businesses can create space. Some, as Carla was talking about, everyone's expected to do more with less.
Yeah.
And that can be taxing on you. That's where you lead to burnout. That's where you can have employees not feeling like they're being able to be the best versions of themselves. So whether it's working with, sustainability teams for hours to volunteer, right? Company led hours to volunteer, or what are other ways that look at the wellness of the employee that you can, which to me is again about sustainability because it's how are you making sure you're creating, just sustainable employee environments, right? So that's another intersection is looking across, and when you're thinking about your talent, how are we making sure that they can bring their whole selves? Are we providing them opportunities to, be able to do those other things, whether it's involve themselves in the community, be in their ERGs, or have that time to volunteer. Those are all things I think help with employees feeling like they have a great place to work.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, I love their line around like just creating something as simple as just creating the space. And you can do this through your benefits, right? You can,
Mhm.
give employees, 5 paid days to volunteer in their local community. Like that's something that's easy but impactful, and it gives permission because I feel like a lot of people can get stuck in the day-to-day grind and just feel like I got to be as productive as possible, and then they don't focus on themselves or their local communities, or things fall to the wayside. And so when you engineer space
Mhm.
for them to do that, they will leverage it and they will be grateful. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about you know responsible growth and global expansion, right? You know, those evolving expectations are also starting to influence how companies think about growth. So Carla, like, as organizations expand into new markets, how can talent and sustainability teams work together to ensure growth is both responsible and scalable?
I think first and foremost, being proactive about the importance of the partnership at the foundational level. So even when you're conceptualizing a market expansion, just understanding who needs to be in the same room at the same time to align on what's most important. I think being intentional about your why and understanding who you need to engage with early on. So, for example, if you're expanding into a new market, you need to be able to create that local market value proposition for those communities. So, it's very important that you, ensure that your PR and communications team is deeply rooted into the workflow and that you have an open channel with key organizations in those markets. So, it could be community organizations, your anybody that does permits, licensing, things like that. But most importantly, that you have someone that is a cultural educator and advocate on the ground, because a lot of times people are very leery of expansions, particularly by American companies into foreign organizations or foreign lands, where they want to understand that it's not going to be a sort of one side benefit, a predatory relationship. So you're coming in to very clearly and distinctly explain to the communities why you want to be there and what's in it for them. But most importantly, you are intentional about your desire to bring them along the journey as a mutually benefiting partner in that. That's important. I think it separately be mindful of the corporate tax from an energy perspective of those expansions. So for example, if you're expanding a manufacturing or engineering organization abroad, you want to be mindful of the taxing of the energy grid in that particular area, and what are things that you need to think about, or the environmental impact of chemicals that are used for some of your manufacturing processes, all those things like that. And I think what's beautiful about the relationship between the sustainability person and the TA person at the same time is that I view the sustainability partner as the canary in the coal mine. Oftentimes they have a different lens on things, so they can point out in your roadmap gaps around hiring. So maybe today you go in and you've done your talent assessment, but they may see things that may be blockers 3 years down the line. So you need to be given those signals very early on so that you can weave it into the existing roadmap and course correct it before it becomes a problem. So all of those things to me are very important. And like Bridgette said, risk mitigation early on, community engagement early on, and most importantly, ensuring that you are able to hire in a repeatable manner in those environments, because sometimes you get great initial insights and you can staff up the center the first time. But what happens if and or when you do begin to have attrition? Can your market even sustain your long-term growth? So that's why having that partner locked at the hip from the inception of the goal is very important.
I love that talent being able to come in and actually like look at the market insights of like, hey, if we do open up here, like it's not just about environmental effects, but like, do we have the pipeline of talent in this area, or we're gonna have to relocate them? That's adds more money to the mix there. That's great. So it really seems like a balance, right, between that responsibility and that scalability, right? And so, Bridgette, what are maybe some of the benefits that you've seen when when you're able to get that balance right?
Yeah. To Carla's point, when you're able to kind of marry those two, the needs of the organization plus the needs of the community, you'll start to see it's that think globally but acting locally perspective, right? So that you're not taking in just 50,000 foot perspective of what you need in a market without actually understanding what's happening on the ground. So that balance can create a great relationship. I've seen a lot of times organizations go into a city taking the same standards that they did in London and go try to do it in New Delhi, and that's not how you can do those things. And then you have an absolute mismatch, and then that site location ends up being a burden on the organization because it wasn't specific to where you're trying to go. So you want to make sure that you're looking at all the right things. Can employees commute there easily? What are there places around there, especially if it's like a high walkability? Let's say like you're in Budapest. Can employees get to it easily? Is there public transportation? All those things are sustainability monikers, but they're also things that help with when we're thinking about the talent that we're bringing into the organization and the ability to build that pipeline, right? So you do want to look at that balance, and you want to make sure it's very locally specific. Also, there's the cultural relevancy around it. So, as Carla was talking about, making sure that you're being very specific to the place that you're going to and understanding the community or the employee or the governmental restrictions you might have. There's a lot of cultural relevant initiatives that you have to be mindful of. Like if you're going into APAC, especially to the Middle East, there's very specific things you have to be mindful of. And having that balance and understanding that up front. Really good real estate teams will have a conversation with sustainability leaders to understand that so that you can build out your checklist. That's a global checklist of all the things you need, but making sure that there's very specific things when it comes to those locations that you can make sure that you are being line of sight to. Because what you don't want to do as a huge organization is just have your real estate team work with a large conglomerate out there to go find a location and you haven't considered all the things that we're talking about, because I think it doesn't serve you or your employees well if you're not taking into account all those other things that can help them have a better work proposition and then be a really true great place to work.
Absolutely. It's complex and a lot to think about, right? Like if you're moving to another country, working with a country manager, like so, or
Mhm.
somebody, working with the local city government and understanding what they need. It makes me think a lot about, all these new data centers popping up and being invested in the US, right? And some of these towns already kind of feeling the pinch of that, of like, rising electricity costs, water usage, like, you really have to think through, like, if we open up and do this thing here, what are the effects of the local community? Because our employees are going to live there, so that's going to be our talent pool as well, right? That's a really eye-opening, you know, I think thought experience to think about that balance, right? And so, as you scale into or maybe enter new markets, like what's worked well, for like balancing the goals with local, the business goals with local and community impact.
I'll give that to Carla because I know she scaled some huge teams.
Yeah.
Well, I think, having the conversation and having, number one, I think very clear understanding of the why and very clear understanding of how you want to articulate and live by your words within those communities. So I really do believe that it is absolutely critical to do your diligence, look at if there are other competitive companies that have also entered that space or that geo before you have. Find out what their playbook was, and most importantly, see what resonated, and most importantly, see what did not work, so that you don't create those unfortunate mistakes. But I think finding out what the concerns are from leaders, in the past when new companies have expanded into your region, by talking to those folks, finding out from the folks on the ground what their biggest concerns are, and most importantly, what their actual needs are, in some and fears,
Mhm.
to acknowledge the whole person, to Bridgette's point, because you want them to be cheering about the fact that you're bringing opportunity there. So I think understanding those concerns and creating a path is very important there. And I think separately, some of the governmental things, there are sometimes roadblocks there. And I think honestly, in some geos, the roadblocks are typically put in place sometimes when people don't do those steps, because they want to make it more difficult for people who they don't feel gave them a seat at the table. So I think that to me is one of the most important things. But doing your diligence from a talent mapping perspective is important. And I think also caring enough to understand, just outside of business, what are some of the on the ground challenges that those communities are facing? Because in some cases, no plan should be so rigid that you can't a little bit expand it, or maybe pare it down, or at least reimagine it to better align with the needs of those communities. So those would be my
Oh, yeah. I think
yes.
what you're really highlighting too is like the big impact of being a part of like a community, like a hire, right? If you're going into a new country, a new area, and you're thinking through sustainability issues, like being able to just talk to another talent leader or business leader that had just did that same thing. Like I love it when that happens in higher communities. Like was it Tracy St. Deek at Zapier, did this expansion into India, and someone was like, oh man, we're going into India. She came on. We did our last webinar that I hosted, talking about that. So leveraging that community and learning from others, maybe mistakes or successes, can be just a game changer, right? So
Right.
love that. Ethical AI and the future of work. Let's talk about it. Let's dive into it. This has been at every roundtable discussion I've had, every conversation I've had is around AI, future of work. We are really in a transition, right? And so as companies scale, technology is continuing to play a bigger and bigger role, especially AI. So the challenge is using these tools in a way that's both efficient but also ethical.
Mhm.
Bridgette, AI is changing how we find and evaluate talent, right? And so, how can sustainability principles like fairness, transparency, and accountability guide the responsible use of AI in hiring?
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely happening. And companies, if you have really good guardrails in place, you truly use it to your advantage, right? Because now you're hiring based on skill set. You don't no longer are those days where you have job descriptions that are looking for unicorns. You can truly just get to the skills that are specifically needed. And you can use technology to help you, one, identify those skills, and two, develop on those skills across the organization. Like once you're really truly understanding what those skill sets are, but you do have to have good guardrails in place. So you should have, I cannot stress enough the importance of ethical guidelines, making sure that your company has that in place, and that it's not just about how you engineer and design, but it's also how you execute. So that every single employee is trained, understands, and is exemplifying what your guardrails are and your guidelines are around the use and the ethical use of AI. So again, not just in the design, but the execution of it too across the organization. But the education is key. You want to make sure every single employee is very much informed on how to utilize it and leverage it to their benefit for the organization. Because what you want to do is that make sure that there's no introduction of bias, right? Because the technology is only as good as how you also train it, right? So you have to make sure that you have everything in place to reduce bias and to improve fairness. And that comes, say it again.
Yeah, because like if it's learning on old biased data, it's just
Yeah.
going to replicate and amplify more biased decisions, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's where you have oversight. Human oversight is necessary for transparency and to make sure that you are, keeping fairness, being as fair as possible. So, ethical guidelines, reduce your bias, making sure that the reduction of bias and that you're improving fairness, and then that human oversight for transparency is going to be key. And you add all those things together, and I think HR and the talent will really use this as a way of help them to quickly identify those where they could find gaps in the organization. But it also helps me, one of the things you hear from employees often is that they don't know if they can grow when they're leaving organizations. They didn't feel like they can grow. They didn't feel like they were being developed. And the use of AI or just any technology can help you identify, or what are those skill sets that you need to identify some classes that you can take or learnings that you can have. And so I'm hoping, and I think it will absolutely equip the TA teams to quickly be able to respond to employees and to help them to develop faster, but also quickly help to close gaps in the organization when you're looking for talent in the marketplace.
All right. So it sounds like a responsibility on leadership and companies to have a point of view on this, like
Absolutely.
to really do some soul searching and thinking through, hey, these are our values, there's not a lot of regulation on AI and things right now. There's not a lot of defined roles. It's still in its infancy, right? And so I think you're right. It does put like a little bit more responsibility on the companies to say like, this is our ethics. This is how we look at fairness and ethics with AI before we start deploying a bunch of this stuff, right? I think.
But there are some guardrails in place, like, organizations, they are pursuing different certifications to make sure that they are as compliant and that they're building in those practices. So, for organizations pursuing, I know we have ISO 42001. Those are safeguards that help you to further solidify that you are looking at every single part of your business to ensure that your business practices around AI are ethical and responsible.
I love it. And then watching what's happening too, because if you look at like the Mobley Workday case, like there's going to be legislation and lawsuits and things that happen that are going to shape this stuff in real time too. And so we got to stay up to date on that. And to me, it seems like when it comes to AI, if it's touching the decision chain, that's where we really have to pay attention. If AI is, recommending who to look at first, if it's, doing a first screen and qualifying who should move to the next and helping you in that way, you need to have human intervention. You need to think about like, how is that ethically handled and transparently communicated to candidates as well. Carla, are there any other like more practical steps for, that TA and HR teams can, take to make sure that technology enhances rather than hinders equity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, unfortunately, it's an easy area to kind of punt. For example, if you've implemented automation and AI into your hiring workflow and you're getting just amazing candidates, a lot of folks will say, see, it's working. And that's great. It is working. It's very important to go back, though, and look through the data to see, okay, you've highlighted and we've passed through a number of amazing candidates, but how many candidates were not selected? And so to double click on that and to find out if there was any bias or something that needs to be maybe reimagined a bit to ensure that you have a bigger funnel, I guess, in terms of that piece. And I think just separately, as an aside, not just looking at the hiring workflow, but also the people development workflow. As we've talked about in the past, there is this AI and innovation that's happening, this digital transformation that has been more favorably impacting some of the younger generations of the workforce. I think TA and HR teams have a responsibility, especially as AI is the new, touted skill set anybody must have. It's important not to not invest or to not forget to invest heavily in developing not only those new to the workforce company employees that come in, new grad, we give them all the tools that they need. But I think to be mindful of your more mature workforce that already works for you so that you're not under leveraging their skills, because there was kind of this digital age that didn't come of age at the time when they were developing in their careers, but now it's there. And so to optimize their performance in prior experience, it's important that you have embedded ongoing learning and training available to those folks to address the skill gaps that they may have, because I do think that that's a big miss for companies right now. And I think the same degree of intentionality that you apply to developing new hires and new grads should be applied to your existing more mature workforce.
I love that because AI is very knowledgeable. It can do a lot of things, right? But one thing it isn't, or doesn't have is context,
Mhm.
right? Like, so you can get a young person come in, they can use AI to get the information needed, but if they don't have the context, that means they don't have the curiosity. And if they don't have the curiosity, that means they don't have the quite questions to ask or to prompt AI to do things at that next strategic level, right? And so like you need both. You need the young folks who can, help upskill even the more experienced folks, and then the experienced folks that can mentor and give context to the younger folks, right? There's this beautiful symbiotic relationship there that exists for cross-generational teams when it comes to AI and ethics and all of that. Fantastic. Lastly, and we'll wrap in about 4 minutes. I want to go to questions, which by the way, folks, feel free to pop them into the Q&A if you have any questions around this. But let's talk a little lastly just on leadership and focus, right? And so we've talked about how technology can support sustainability.
Mhm.
Real change needs leadership, right? So sustaining these efforts long term takes vision and focus. Bridgette, how can leaders ensure that sustainability efforts stay focused on innovation,
Mhm.
long-term business value, as well as maintaining that competitive advantage?
Yeah. Well, I will always say this: integrate it into your business strategic imperatives. Right.
Yeah.
The minute that you do that, that everyone's OKRs are a reflection of it, then it will sustain anything. But you also have to be extremely curious. This is a very fast moving pace, especially if you're on the technology side of businesses. So you want to be as curious as possible, making sure that you're understanding what's not only material to your business, but that you're, constantly benchmarking yourself against the industry. So that awareness is going to be necessary to make sure that innovation doesn't outpace you, and then to be agile. I one of the things I tell my team is if when we lose our agility, we lose our ability to actually be as impactful to the business as possible. And it's just sustainability today looks very different than it did a year ago. And there's no
Yeah.
easier way to say that, to say the least, right? So when you look at everything from climate to inclusion, the pendulum has shifted so drastically. And how do you make sure that that noise doesn't impact your values, and how do you make sure that your values still thrive in the midst of it? And that's when and the way to do that is to make sure that it's ingrained into your business practices.
I love that you mentioned the pendulum swing because it is, and it almost seems, like this topic, in this moment is difficult because
Mhm.
it is. There has been deregulation environmentally. There's been lots of changes in DEI practices. There's been a lot of these changes going on socially, economically, geopolitically, all of that, right? And so
Mhm.
I think it's good to remind people that the pendulum swings the other way pretty dramatically again, right? And so thinking about this stuff right now, where it may not be the top executive imperative at the moment, right, is even more important because it will swing back the other way. You will start seeing it affect your bottom line. And if you don't have a plan in place and you aren't thinking about it now, you will not be ready and we'll be stuck in this reactive cycle of like, oh, we stopped focusing on this thing and now it's important again, you know. Uh, Absolutely. Carla, what helps sustainability thrive within an organization long term, right? So, how do you get it ingrained into how people think and executives think and make decisions, and not just like what we kind of saw, right before and after the pandemic, sort of like this, this more of a campaign approach to sustainability. Like, how do you really get it ingrained?
I think TA and HR leaders are uniquely positioned to give a very big and deserved seat at the table to sustainability officers or their equivalents. I think TA and HR folks, we are at the epicenter of strategic execution. You can't do anything in a company without people. So we're privy to information very early on. The second you know that there's need to grow, it is your duty to at least highlight the conversation. And I think just by doing that and then bringing it up in any meeting that you're in about anything around people, or when you see the company's annual OKRs or corporate pillars come out, if you don't see it clearly defined, you be the person to raise your hand to point out, and where does sustainability live in these efforts, or where should it live, or how are we thinking about that? That's the best thing that I think that TA and HR can do.
Love that. Last rapid fire question, because I want to go to some questions. What's one thing, and this is for both of you, what's one thing that TA and HR leaders can do right now to start weaving sustainability into how they hire and engage people, right?
I will
I will
start.
always say, I would just say, make it part of your value proposition, right? Your corporate values and your sustainability initiatives should be absolutely in lockstep with one another, and they should be a direct reflection of one another. And if they are not, make sure that they are.
Got it. So it's like defining it in the values and then looking at your actual HR programs, practices, and saying, do they fall in line with it? If there's a
Mm-hmm.
gap, we got to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Carla, how about you?
And I think also clearly articulating what sustainability means to you in your company and ensuring that all of their people leaders are able to articulate that clearly to their teams, and that most importantly, their individual team members understand it and apply that lens to everything that they do.
And I'll say one last thing. Um, a lot of people get caught up in the vernacular of it all, right? What is or what isn't? Is it sustainability? Is it CSR? Is it this or that? And again, to me, while I can appreciate titles, I'm more worried about the actions. And so just get beyond trying to going through all the alphabet soup of, what should we call it versus do we have business practices that actually execute on the need or not? And that's where you really need to focus on is, and when I say working myself out of job, the ultimate goal is that this is just how we do business. That's the whole purpose of this. It should just become how we do business, how we grow, how we maintain, how we scale, how we thrive, how we pour into our communities, how we execute on our strategies. It's just how we do business. And if you can do that, then you're not so much worried about what it's called. You're worried about how you make it happen. And that's what the work needs. That's what needs to happen across organizations.
Yeah, doing good is profitable.
Absolutely.
I think about Patagonia and some of these great companies, right, that
Mhm.
are wildly successful, extremely profitable, but because they have very strong, well-defined values and they put their money where their mouth is, right? And so, yeah, I think what I kind of heard there, Bridgette, was like, let's do good.
Mhm.
You can scale, you can be a profitable and a successful company, but how we define success has to go beyond what shareholders define it by. But are we doing good in the world too?
But there is shareholder value. I
Yeah.
I speak to the boards all the time. Shareholders see the value. There's the
Right.
risk mitigation part of that. There's the operations and the optimization part of it. But they also see the absolute value of being a fantastic corporate steward.
Of
And Matt, I
that.
have to say this, mission-driven work unlocks passion in employees.
Yeah.
And if people are passionate about what they're doing, it does not feel like work.
Yeah.
Therefore, you will have much more productive employees, and most importantly, you'll have more corporate joy.
Love
That
it.
part.
All right. Well, I know we got just like 1 minute left, but Ray asks, what are non-TA leaders' thoughts on leveraging AI tools at the top of the funnel for maybe resume reviews, screens, or interviews? It seems like TA has separate thoughts from non-TA, so I guess like HR.
I will answer that. I think there is a delta between what people assume AI capabilities are and what it's actually doing. So I think we've not fully realized its capabilities. So I think there is an opportunity that I strongly recommend any TA and HR leader to do. You proactively bring insights about capabilities to anyone who is not in TA and HR to let them know what the trends that you're seeing across businesses, what the roadblocks are, and most importantly, what the gaps and issues are. And then you think about, how do you ethically and more thoughtfully integrate AI into what you're doing. But I think it actually gives an opportunity for you to drive the conversations with people that are not in TA orgs.
Yeah, I think that education is a big thing here, right? It seems to me like when I talk to folks in engineering, they've got a lot deeper, darker thoughts around AI and ethics because they understand the technology behind it and like the actual implications. I talked to TA leaders and they're very bullish. They see the ability to really get rid of some administrative stuff so they can do the more human element of that, right? But you're absolutely right. We're still in the infancy of what this technology will become capable of, and every day it seems to be getting more and more capable. But we just haven't even breached what's possible. I think there's a lot of hype and overpromising too. I think on
Right.
average, when I talk to TA leaders, they can see a modest 20 to 30% productivity gain by implementing AI in its current form. In other areas, it adds more work. It becomes more complex. More things can break. So wonderful, wonderful discussion. Carla, Bridgette, it's always a pleasure to chat with you and learn from your just rich experience with this work. And so, yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to leave them. We'll follow up after the webinar. But thank you so much for joining us today.